Hello and welcome to this video of Inside Stream. I am your host Dr. Manmohan Radhesham Yadav, and in today's episode I will be talking about why the central banks all over the world are quietly building up their gold reserves and what is causing the gold prices to rise all over the world. Starting with, the gold is making a comeback. Central banks all around the world are quietly stacking it in the vaults, and it is not a coincidence. After decades of de-emphasizing gold in favor of fiat currencies, countries from India to China to Russia are buying more gold ever than before. But why now? Why are the central banks hoarding gold while the global economy is flooded with paper money and digital assets? To understand this, we need to go back to the role of gold, which has been significant in the global financial systems historically. For centuries, gold was the backbone of money. It wasn't just a shiny metal, it was real, tangible wealth. Unlike paper currencies, which can be printed endlessly, gold has a finite supply. Its scarcity gives it an intrinsic value. Even today, despite the rise of digital currencies and complex financial instruments, gold retains its psychological and financial status that nothing else can replicate. During the 20th century, gold became secondary in the global finance. The Bretton Woods Conference system tied the US dollar to the gold, and other currencies floated as well. By the year 1971, the United States had abandoned the gold standard entirely, and the paper currency became a fully fiat currency. Since then, most of the world has relied on trust in central banks rather than physical assets to maintain economic stability. For decades, the focus was on leveraging debt, interest rates, policies, and inflation targets. Gold, meanwhile, was treated as a relic or a hedge for investors who distrusted the paper currencies. Fast forward to today, the environment has changed completely. Inflation has returned in multiple economies. Debt levels are unprecedented, both for the governments and the households. Countries have been printing money to cover deficits and launching stimulus packages to prop up their economies. Digital currencies and financial speculation dominates, but the underlying financial infrastructure is fragile. In this climate, central banks are returning to gold as a safe haven. Take Russia, for example. Over the past decade, Russian central banks has added thousands of tons of gold to its reserves. Why? One reason is geopolitical stability. When international tensions rise, the value of paper assets can fluctuate wildly, and the access to foreign currencies can be restricted through sanctions. Gold, however, is universally recognized, and it is immune to political manipulations. By holding gold, Russia ensures that it has tangible assets that can be used for trade or reserves without relying on potentially hostile financial systems. China is another example. It is a major buyer. The People's Bank of China has steadily increased its gold reserves, signaling to the world that it views gold as a cornerstone of long-term economic security. China's currency, the renminbi, is increasingly internationalized, and it gives gold the credibility. It gives the Chinese currency the credibility in global finance. By holding substantial gold reserves, China reduces its dependence on the US dollar and strengthens its position in political economic disputes. Even countries that historically relied on dollar, like India and Turkey, are accumulating gold. This is not only about hedging against inflation, but also about reducing vulnerability. Gold acts as an insurance against currency devaluation. In times of economic instability, central banks with large gold reserves have leverage and options that others do not. It's also worth noting that global gold production is limited. Mines produce a finite amount of gold each year, and recycling the existing gold is expensive and inefficient. This scarcity adds to its appeal as a long-term store of value. Central banks recognize that they are competing for an asset that cannot be printed or manufactured. As the demand rises, the price inevitably increases. And now let's talk about the consequences for the common people. When central banks hoard gold, it is not just an abstract financial move. It signals that those institutions are preparing for potential instability. For investors, the common man, and the savers, this is a warning sign. The inflation may rise, currencies may weaken, and financial markets may face volatility. Individuals with little exposure to gold or other tangible assets might find their savings eroding in real terms. This is why the changing dynamics of the global economy has resulted in the countries with large gold reserves to have options in negotiations, trade deals, and financial crises. Those without gold are more vulnerable to currency shocks or sanctions. This is why central banks are not hoarding gold purely as an investment, they are accumulating economic power and resilience. In addition, gold buying by central banks impacts global markets. Increased demand pushes prices higher. When prices rise, the investors often seek protection in gold backed assets, ETFs, and mining stocks. This can create cycles where gold becomes both a defensive asset and a speculative opportunity. Understanding these dynamics is key to anticipating shifts in both global and personal finances. Finally, there is also a historical lesson as well. Throughout the history, periods of fiat money expansion, economic crisis, and geopolitical tensions have coincided with increased gold accumulations by the governments. The Roaring Twenties, the Great Depression, post World War II reconstruction, all saw central banks prioritizing gold in times of uncertainty. The pattern today mirrors those periods. Gold is returning to the center of finance not by accident but by necessity. In short, central banks are hoarding gold because it offers stability, security, and leverage in an unstable world. They understand what most people ignore. Money is only as dependable as the system behind it. Fiat currencies can fail. Debt can spiral out of control. Digital assets can fluctuate widely. But gold, it is real, finite, and universally recognized. Watching who holds gold and how much they hold offers an insight into the health of the global financial system. Central banks' renewed focus on gold is also tied to the structural weakness in the global financial system. In a world dominated by debt and complex derivatives, trust in currency is critical. Fiat currencies rely on faith that governments and central banks will manage the economies responsibly. But when debt to GDP ratios are at historic highs, deficits are growing, and money printing has accelerated, that trust starts to erode. Gold, by contrast, has stood the test of time. It is immune to the actions of individual governments, and its value cannot be artificially created. The US Federal Reserve, despite holding the world's largest gold reserve, has quietly acknowledged the importance of diversification. And while the Federal Reserve rarely adds significant quantities of gold today, its holding remains a critical hedge against currency instability. When gold investors start asking globally questions, the value of dollar gold serves as both literal and psychological safeguard. In many ways, central banks' gold hoarding is a hedge against very policies that they themselves pursue, including low interest rates, quantitative easing programs. European central banks are also increasing gold reserves, though more cautiously. After decades of financial integration, countries in the Eurozone have recognized that currency crises are possible. National central banks retain the right to manage their reserves independently, and many view gold as a critical insurance policy against any systematic shocks. For instance, the Bundesbank of Germany has repatriated significant portions of its gold reserves in recent years, moving it from foreign vaults back to Germany. This act was more than symbolic. It represented an assertion of control over national wealth in uncertain times. Gold also provides liquidity in crisis. Unlike many financial instruments, it is universally accepted and can be converted into cash or used for international settlements without legal or political barriers. This makes it a strategic tool during geopolitical tensions, trade disputes, or sanctions regimes. Countries with substantial gold reserves are better positioned to respond to financial shocks because gold is not tied to any single financial system. It remains portable, valuable, and resistant to external manipulations. Another driving factor is currency wars. When nations compete to weaken their currencies to gain trade advantages, gold becomes a safe haven against depreciating domestic money. It is visible in China's consistent accumulation of gold. By holding a sizable portion of reserves in gold, China can hedge against fluctuations in dollar, euro, and other major currencies. In other words, gold acts as a buffer against both domestic inflation and international currency volatility. The psychology behind gold should not be underestimated. Humans have assigned value to gold for thousands of years, and that value persists today as well. In times of economic uncertainty, investors and governments alike turn to gold because it represents stability. Central banks understand that perception matters as much as actual value. By holding gold, they signal confidence and prudence, which in turn strengthens their trust in currencies. The mechanism of holding gold is also interesting. Central banks purchase gold quietly in international markets to avoid driving up prices too quickly. They often use swaps, bullion banks, and strategic partnerships to accumulate reserves without causing market panic. Unlike stock markets or bond markets, gold markets are relatively small, and large purchases can significantly impact the prices. Central banks have become sophisticated in their methods to acquire gold efficiently and discreetly. The broader implications for individual investors are significant. Rising gold prices purchased by central banks can indicate warning about potential instability in the fiat currencies. Individuals holding only cash or digital currency may find themselves exposed to the consequences of inflation, currency devaluation, or economic shocks. Investing in gold, gold backed assets, or commodities becomes not just an opportunity but a form of insurance. While gold itself does not generate interest or dividends, its preservation of wealth can be critical when paper currencies lose purchasing power. Historically, gold accumulation by central banks precedes major economic shifts. The early 2000s saw central banks buying gold quietly, coinciding with growing global debt and increasing uncertainty in the US dollar. The 2008 financial crisis further highlighted the importance of tangible assets. Countries with substantial gold reserves weathered the crisis more flexibly, while those reliant solely on fiat currencies experienced greater vulnerability. Another dimension is the geopolitical aspect of gold hoarding. Central banks are not acting in isolation. Their purchases are influenced by alliances, trade relations, and global power dynamics. Countries with large gold reserves can negotiate trade deals more favorably, use gold as collateral, and exert influence without relying on foreign currencies. Gold, therefore, is both a financial and a strategic asset, blending economic power with national security. The pace of gold acquisition is also noteworthy. Unlike speculative buying in stock markets, central banks acquire gold systematically over extended periods of time. They are not chasing short term gains but are building reserves for decades along horizons. This long term perspective differentiates institutional buying from individual investors whose decisions are often influenced by market sentiments. Finally, there is a digital shadow of gold. While cryptocurrencies have gained attention as alternatives to trading money, central banks remain cautious. Gold is time tested, digital currencies are not. By hoarding gold, central banks ensure that even if digital or fiat systems fail, they are underlying universally accepted store of value. This approach balances innovation with stability, allowing countries to embrace modern finances while protecting against systematic risk. In conclusion, central banks are holding gold because it offers a combination of security, stability, and strategic leverage. It is a hedge against debt, inflation, currency wars, and geopolitical uncertainty. For individuals, understanding this trend is crucial. Gold is more than an investment, it is a signal about health and trajectory of the global financial system. Watching central bank behaviors often offers insights into what lies ahead and how to protect personal wealth in an unstable world. The concentration of gold among central banks also influences global financial stability. When a few institutions control substantial amounts of world's gold, they hold considerable leverage over the market. Central banks can influence prices through sales, swaps, or lending gold to bullion banks. This power allows them to manage volatility and stabilize economies. But it also means that sudden policy shifts can ripple through markets, affecting currencies, commodities, and investor sentiments. Gold's role in monetary policy has evolved over time. While the gold standard is no longer in effect, gold continues to serve as a benchmark for trust and value. Central banks use it to back positions of their currency reserves, reinforcing confidence in fiat systems. Its implicit backing is particularly important during crisis when investors seek tangible assets over promises. Gold's universal acceptance ensures that even if one currency loses value, the central banks retain a reliable asset base. The geopolitical implications of gold reserves are increasingly significant. Nations that control large reserves gain strategic leverage in international negotiations. For instance, countries facing sanctions or trade restrictions can use gold as a neutral medium to settle transactions or secure credit. Gold reduces dependence or potentially hostile financial systems, providing a form of financial sovereignty. This dynamic explains why countries like Russia and China have accelerated gold purchases in recent years, reinforcing both economic and geopolitical positions. Central banks' gold purchases also reflect concerns about inflation and monetary policy. As governments increase spending and central banks expand balance sheets through quantitative easing, fears of currency debasement rises. Gold serves as a hedge against these risks, preserving wealth even when traditional instruments face uncertainty. Historical precedent demonstrates that during periods of high inflation or currency devaluation, gold retains value while paper money loses purchasing power. Another factor driving gold hoarding is global debt. Many countries are operating with the debt to GDP ratios at levels unprecedented in peacetime. These imbalances create systematic vulnerabilities as governments rely on continuous borrowing to finance deficits. Gold, being outside the fiat system, is not subjected to default risk, providing central banks with a tangible safeguard. It also offers counterbalance against rising interest rates, which constrain debt servicing capacity. The psychology of central bank behavior should not be underestimated. Gold symbolizes security and prudence, and holding it signals discipline to international markets. Investors and other central banks take cues from these holdings. A surge in purchase can create a feedback loop, encouraging others to increase reserves, which in turn supports global gold prices. This collective perception reinforces gold's role as a cornerstone of financial stability. Central banks also use gold for liquidity operations. In crisis, gold can be swapped for foreign currency or used to secure loans from other institutions. This operational flexibility is vital during market stress. For example, during the 2000 financial crisis, gold swaps provided liquidity to the banks and governments, mitigating impact of sudden cash shortages. By maintaining substantial reserves, central banks ensure that they have the tools to respond quickly to unforeseen challenges. The interplay between gold and currency markets is another critical dimension. When central banks accumulate gold, it often reflects concerns about currency strength. A strong domestic currency may reduce the need for gold accumulation, whereas a weakening currency encourages higher gold reserves as protection against depreciation. This dynamic creates a direct link between monetary policy, exchange rates, and demand for gold, influencing both domestic and global markets. Digital currencies and modern payment systems have not replaced the need for gold, while currencies are often presented as alternatives to traditional money. They lack the stability and universal acceptance of gold. Central banks recognize this distinction. Gold is a proven store of value, and its physical presence ensures security against technological or systematic failures. By combining traditional reserves with digital innovation, Central banks maintain both modern efficiency and historical reliability. Gold trends, global trends in gold accumulation also reveal strategic diversification. Countries diversify reserves not only across currencies but also across asset types. Gold represents a non sovereign, non credit based asset. It is independent of any government's financial health, which provides protection against any political risk. This diversification is crucial in an interconnected world where economic shocks in one region can propagate globally. The pace of gold accumulation varies by country, reflecting both domestic economic conditions and international strategy. Some nations, like China and Russia, have consistently increased reserves over the past decade, anticipating long term currency and geopolitical shifts. Others, like the United States and European nations, focus on strategic holdings while balancing liquidity and economic policy needs. This variation highlights how central banks tailor gold strategies to national priorities. Gold also plays a role in confidence building during crisis. Public perception matters. Citizens trust governments more when the reserves are strong. Even if public is unaware of exact holdings, knowing that gold supports national currency reinforces faith in monetary policy. This psychological dimension is subtle but powerful, influencing economic behavior, spending patterns, and investment decisions. Finally, gold accumulation can signal long term risk assessments. Central banks are no longer reactive in short term, they plan for decades. When institutions increase reserves, it suggests anticipation of potential instability, inflation, or geopolitical tension. For individuals and investors, tracking central bank gold purchases provides insight into perceived global risk. Sudden spike in buying indicates growing concern, while stability may suggest confidence in existing monetary systems. In short, central banks hoarding gold is not just for intrinsic value, but for strategic, operational, and psychological reasons. It supports currency stability, provides liquidity, mitigates risks, and reinforces confidence both domestically and internationally. Gold's unique attributes make it indispensable in an uncertain financial world, and central banks' actions provide early warning signs for investors and governments alike. Central bank gold accumulation also has implications for global investment strategies. When major institutions increase their holdings, it signals a long term hedge against volatility in inflation. Investors closely monitor these actions because they often foreshadow shifts in monetary policy or economic outlook. A surge in gold buying can indicate that central banks anticipate weakening fiat currencies, rising inflation, or geopolitical instability, prompting market participants to adjust portfolios accordingly. The ripple effects of gold hoarding extend to commodities and currencies. Gold purchases by central banks reduce available supply in the open market, supporting higher prices. This can influence mining companies, ETFs, and derivatives markets tied to gold. Similarly, countries with weaker currencies may experience depreciation pressure as central banks increase gold reserves, signaling a lack of confidence in fiat stability. These dynamics make gold a central piece of financial forecasting and risk assessment. Historically, the president reinforces gold's importance. During the Great Depression and the financial crisis of the 20th century, nations with strong gold reserves were better positioned to weather shocks. Gold provided liquidity, supported currency stability, and allowed governments to finance recovery efforts. Modern central banks continue to apply these lessons, recognizing that tangible assets provide security that purely electronic or paper based reserves cannot match. Central banks also leverage gold for international diplomacy. Holding substantial reserves enables countries to engage in strategic swaps, lending arrangements, or bilateral agreements. These transactions can bypass traditional financial systems, providing flexibility in geopolitical negotiations. Gold's universal acceptability makes it an effective medium for those purposes, and its strategic use enhances national influence on global stage. The transparency of central bank gold holdings varies. Some countries publish detailed reports while others maintain secrecy to preserve strategic advantage. This opacity can affect market perception as investors may interpret undisclosed purchases or sales as signals of confidence or concern. The lack of transparency introduces uncertainty, reinforcing gold's role as a stabilizing asset in times of financial stress. Gold's role in reserves management also intersects with the fiscal policy. Governments often rely on central banks to support national debt and currency stability. Gold reserves provide a backstop against excessive borrowing or monetary expansion. By holding tangible assets, central banks ensure that fiat currency systems remain credible even when governments engage in aggressive financial policies. This balancing act between liquidity, stability, and risk management is central to modern economic governance. The interplay between gold and inflation is critical. As central banks expand balance sheets through quantitative easing or stimulus programs, concerns about currency debasement grows. Gold offers protection against these risks, maintaining purchasing power when fiat currencies lose value. Historical data shows that during the periods of high inflation, gold consistently outperforms other assets, underscoring its reliability as a hedge. Central banks also consider technological and systematic risks. In a world increasingly reliant on digital transactions, cyber threats, and complex financial networks, physical gold provides security that cannot be hacked or manipulated electronically. Holding gold ensures that central banks retain a stable, verifiable, and universally accepted asset independent of technological failures or financial system breakdowns. The strategic accumulation of gold also has a psychological effect on the global markets. When investors see central banks increasing holdings, it reinforces the perception of risk in fiat currencies and the financial system. This perception leads to increased demand for gold among private investors, creating a self-reinforced cycle that strengthens gold's value. Central banks understand and manage this dynamic carefully to avoid excessive market disruption. Global economic uncertainty continues to drive gold purchases. Trade tensions, geopolitical conflicts, and rising debt levels contribute to risk aversion. Gold provides a reliable store of value in uncertain times. By hoarding gold, central banks can create a buffer against shocks, ensuring that they can respond effectively to crises and maintain economic stability for their countries. Central banks' coordination also influences gold markets. Organizations like Bank for International Settlements facilitate discussions and agreements on gold swaps and lending. Coordinated actions help stabilize markets and prevent extreme volatility. This cooperation underscores gold's role not only as a national asset but as a global financial instrument that supports systematic stability. The distribution of gold reserves reveals trends in economic power. Emerging economies are increasing gold holdings that signals shifting global influence. Countries that previously relied on dominant reserve currencies are diversifying into gold to reduce dependence. This strategic accumulation represents both economic prudence and geopolitical positioning, reshaping the balance of power in international finance. In addition, gold acts as a counterbalance to sovereign credit risk. Unlike bonds or other government backed instruments, gold does not carry default risk. Central banks facing potential instability in global markets or the possibility of debt restructuring use gold to maintain financial security. This independence from credit system is particularly vulnerable in times of fiscal stress or political uncertainty. Finally, central bank gold hoarding is a forward-looking strategy. These institutions plan for decades considering potential future crises, demographic shifts, and economic transformations. Gold accumulation provides insurance against unforeseen events, ensuring that central banks can meet obligations, stabilize currencies, and support national economies under a wide range of scenarios. In conclusion, central banks hold gold for strategic, operational, and psychological reasons. It supports monetary stability, provides liquidity, hedges against inflation, and signals confidence to domestic and international markets. Gold's unique properties make it indispensable in modern finance. Its accumulation by central banks offers insight into perceived risks, global economic trends, and the priorities of nations navigating an uncertain financial landscape. Understanding this dynamic is crucial for investors, policymakers, and anyone seeking to anticipate the next moves in the global economy. Thank you for joining me and see you again soon.